Line is yours. We were really excited, so we hope you could just.
All right, people, it's 6:45.
All right, take care.
I now call the May 16th, 2023 special meeting of the City Council to order. Ms. Meggerly, if you could take the roll, please.
Ms. Nicely?
Present.
Mr. Cahill?
Present.
Ms. Kyle?
Here.
Mr. Skidmore?
Here.
Mr. Hermes?
Here.
Ms. Skidmore? Here. Ms. Reckers? Ms. Jasper Lucas?
Here.
Ms. Wilson?
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Glenn, you're going to discuss the Human Resources Director position.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, Council. What we're looking to do is to change the classification of the Human Resource Administrator position to Director of Human Resources. So as everybody's aware, with Ed Bailey's impending departure at the end of the month, we're going to be seeking out somebody new. And what we're wanting to do is to take that position and the importance of that position back to what it was prior to Ed coming on board. So it's, I don't want to say it's always been a director level position, but it was a director level position for a long time prior to him coming here. So what you have before you is two things. It's the change in the job description. So basically you see everything that's been added and struck through, and basically taking that job description back identically to what was there prior to the change to administrator. So basically what the intent is to take this job and make it a more engaging position, a position that somebody can help us with a lot more of recruitment and retainment, employee recruitment and retainment. I think that would be very much a top priority. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on. But and then also a lot more hands-on with helping out with a lot of HR functions, where the current administrator position kind of focused in on just the HR and human resources. You come on up. And this one will be a lot more of the same of that, and then also providing more support and engagement with all the departments. So, you know, just a better support mechanism and providing better customer service. So within that job description, everything, like I said, has been added and struck through. And then also moving forward with the wage scale. So in addition to the job description changes, also I'd like to, with taking that to a director level position, change the pay band, which is currently in pay band F, and moving it up just one pay band into pay band E, which everybody also has a copy of that. So with the pay scale difference, I just think that kind of gets everybody in general government kind of more in alignment. You know, even though that position would still be at a lesser level than maybe some of the other directors, I think having a gap between some of them in pay band D and then going all the way down to F was too much. I think bringing them up to pay band E would be hugely important. Does anybody have any questions on the job description, the purpose, and the intent, or anything like that? Okay, great, thank you.
All right, Mr. Gatlin.
All right, with that, we'll do a reading of an ordinance of the City of Erlanger in Kenton County, Kentucky, establishing a personnel pay and classification plan for all Erlanger employees and non-elected city officials. We had done a first reading at our last meeting 2 weeks ago, but it was determined that this addition would be a substantive change. So we're doing a new first reading. So you will see in this wage scale 2024, everything is the same as we had done the prior first reading. The strike through is what is being deleted. The underline is what's being added, with the only change from what you previously had seen 2 weeks ago of moving from F, as Mr. Glenn had indicated, the Human Resources Administrator position from band F, striking it through there and adding it as a director position in band E.
All right, and I just ask that Ms. Meggerly please note in the minutes the first reading of this ordinance. All right, do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Ms. Nicely, Ms. Kyle, any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carried. We'll come back at 7 o'clock to start the regular meeting. All right, it's 7 o'clock. Let's call the City Council caucus meeting to order, and we'll go ahead and get started. The first item on our agenda is discussion on the city streets clarification for funding. Interim CAO Peter Glenn, take it over.
Okay, again, thank you. This is pretty simple and straightforward. What we're doing is working with the Northern Kentucky Ad District, and they're working on behalf of KYTC on the state level in conjunction with the MARF funding mechanism. So what they've been asked to do is to go through all state, county, and city roads for verification. So what they've done is they have compiled a list of city-owned and maintained streets, which I do believe everybody got a copy of, and then they passed it out to the city, and we passed it on to Public Works for verification. So, and we're in the process right now of, we've been working with them back and forth over the last several weeks, but we're doing our final review right now. So what you see in your council packet isn't necessarily going to be the final version. But what they've asked the city to do is by resolution to approve the streets that we say that we do own and maintain. And it's just so that way they can have a good verification of the streets that they can send back to KYTC that in turn will be used with the MARF funding. So what I anticipate next week, we will finish the review in-house, and then that list will get turned around and be part of your council packet leading into June's council meeting. Any questions on that? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilman Tyson Hermes, Gary Meyer Emergency Fund Use Requirements.
Oh, yes, thank you, Mayor. I've sent some information to the other council members regarding this discussion, and we have discussed this in the past. Back in January, we had a similar discussion, and there wasn't a whole lot that came from that discussion. And so I asked Mr. Gatlin if he would help me with the proper process or whatever we needed to do in order to be able to advance this idea. And he said that he thought the best thing to do would be to modify the existing ordinance. But as you probably remember, on September 20th, 2022, Council voted in favor of a budget amendment that transferred $5 million from the unrestricted reserves of the general fund to the capital fund. And so that money is there now. That money is in the capital fund. But in the process of the discussions on that transfer, it was said that that money would be used for emergency use. However, there's nothing that separates that money from the rest of the capital fund to make it for emergency use. So adding some of the things we talked about back in January, one was adding a line item to the budget so we can track, so council can track that money and see if we're dipping into it or if we're using it or if we're planning to use it. And then the other things were just outlining what needs to happen for us to use that money. What are the rules about using that money? So we added a section, section 3.0 of the ordinance regarding the restrictions on this fund. And it says it should only be used for capital purchases such as have been defined in the ordinance. In the case of a natural disaster or act of God that significantly impacts city assets, and utilizing money from this fund is the only way to avoid a significant reduction in city services. And then also another way that we can use that money is upon a vote of the majority of council. So if council decided, as a majority to use it, whether it be a natural disaster or not, if they figure something is an emergency sometime in the future, that it could be used for that as well. That's really the only changes in here. Yes.
I have a question on the items that you have listed that we could use the money for. Could council decide to use it for something different, or are they limited to those items right there? Does it really say that it's limited to those?
It does say it's
Okay.
limited to using it for those, but I think that list pretty well
Covers everything?
captures everything that's capital.
Okay.
Does anybody else weigh in on that? I've thought of that a couple times. I think that pretty much encapsulates everything that's capital for the city, right?
Yeah, I think when Gary worked on this 6 months ago, I actually think we may have worked with Kara a little bit to make sure that we were encompassing everything in capital, and I think that was the goal.
Ms. Jasper Lucas.
Thank you. I know it's been brought up several times that several council members, I won't speak for anybody else but myself, I know that there's the idea of having either a staff member work on a strategic plan along with council, or having a task force that works on a strategic plan, and that was something that I want to see before I make any parameters for spending the $5 million or how it's going to be spent. Right now, I don't have an appetite for any new legislation regarding the $5 million other than it just sitting there. I don't think we need to put any additional parameters on it. At this time, I would like to see it be able to be used for salaries if that were an emergency. I know that's not typically what we think of when we think of what's an emergency, but there could be a time when we needed to use it for salaries. And it looks like this would restrict us from that. So I just don't have an appetite for restricting it further and taking away the freedom to use it for a true emergency that may or may not be outside of this list.
But salaries is not included on that list. I'm a little lost on what you're saying there.
It could only be used for the things on the list.
Yeah, that's the current ordinance.
Right, I understand. But we could
have used it for salaries before.
And we could move it out of the fund and use it for salaries if we needed to, if it were an emergency.
Sure.
I mean, I realize that that's not your typical thing that you think of as something we might need to use money in an emergency for. It's usually equipment or something like that. But I'm just saying I don't feel that any further parameters need to be put on it right now until we know what the strategic plan for the city is, which I know I have, requested that, and I believe other council members have mentioned that as far as wanting that to come ahead of further legislation regarding the $5 million.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to keep in mind that there is over $5 million in another emergency fund that the city carries every year. That's for any kind of emergency, right? And that could be used for salaries if necessary, or any other emergency. How often, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Kara. How often do we dip into that emergency fund? Never?
I mean, for the last couple of years, we have not dipped into, we've had a surplus each year, so we have not dipped into reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Our restricted reserves, that it's 30% of our appropriations, so it has consistently gone up, and our unrestricted reserves has also gone up due to a surplus consistently. Ms. Jasper Lucas.
I feel like we've already thoroughly debated the majority of council wanting to have the $5 million. I think we've all been told multiple times that there is other money that's set aside for emergencies. I think we all understand that. And we all still voted to put the money where it is. So I don't feel like it's fruitful to rehash that same conversation over and over again when we've all been told that and we all still voted the way we did. Or not all, but a majority of council.
I have a question. I thought the purpose of putting it into capital funds was for capital expenses. And to me, is salaries a capital expense? Yeah, I didn't think so. Because that was Gary's concern. He was worried that we were going to need cruisers or a fire truck, and if we're in dire distress, we'd have that money set aside for that particular item. So, I mean, all these other things on here are capital assets that we'd be replacing. Salary, to me, doesn't fit into that category. So if that were the intent, we should have moved it someplace else.
I just mentioned salaries as an example. I'm not saying that's the only way it should be spent. That's not what I said. I just meant, like, I like the freedom. I don't like further restriction of the money. I just was using salary as an example.
Mr. Cahill?
So I think when Gary talked about this, he used emergencies as an example, not trying to make it an emergency fund, but trying to move it in there in case we needed to utilize that. And when we started talking natural disaster, act of God, we had a rescue truck hit by a train. How's that defined? Is that an act of God? Is that a natural disaster? Is that poor driving? Is that human error? You know, but you need to replace those kind of things. And that's probably something we need to look at. Yeah, you weren't here yet, Chief. Don't worry, it's okay. Yeah. But I think that's important when we look at that, when we start doing that. You know, and we go back to this number 2, upon a vote of the majority of council. We could change a lot of things with the majority of council. You know, it takes 2 meetings. And if it truly was a natural disaster, it doesn't even have to be in person, as we found out. So, you know, it's in the capital fund. We can kind of look at it and say, yes, this works or this doesn't work at that time. Because if this cut, you know, if we had our allotment made for that year, and then all of a sudden we're saying, oh gosh, you know, we got to make sure that this fits this definition. You know, then we're going back to the majority of council saying, okay, it wasn't an act of God, it wasn't a natural disaster, it was human error, but we need to get this back online because it is a problem for the city of Erlanger or the county or the state or whatever we need to do with that. So that's just my thoughts on it, and not a fan of doing this. Keep it open.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was I hear what you're saying, Mr. Cahill, and I can appreciate that. And I think that was the purpose of saying that the council could vote for something. If it was the case of an apparatus being hit by a train, that's where we could say, okay, this is an emergency to us. This is an emergency to Erlanger. I mean, the state of Kentucky is not going to weigh in on that, you know, or there's not going to be a federal judgment. That's something that we can determine is an emergency for us, and that's the point of council being able to vote for it. The other thing I wanted to mention was that this money was unrestricted before. We could have used it for anything, and the whole point of what Mr. Meyer sold to council was that it would be earmarked so it could only be used for capital expenditures. And in the meeting on August 2nd, let me make sure I'm looking at the right thing here. Yeah, so on the meeting on August 2nd, Mr. Meyer had requested this, and he itemized the things that they could be used on. That's what's in the ordinance. And if you remember, well, this went on to more discussion on September 6th. Mr. Doan had brought up that he didn't really understand why we were doing this, because this wasn't, he said this was a financial transaction. Give me a second here. Mr. Meyer said at that time that he was happy to discuss this and that what he was looking at doing, he was reflecting back over a decade ago when the payroll taxes were set aside for the road repairs, and he wanted to create a phase 2 of that. And in the course of the discussion, Mr. Doan had said that he thought it was a breach of our fiduciary duty to the citizens, that this was an accounting transaction, not a budget amendment. And we had just seen the communities decimated in eastern Kentucky around that time that didn't have the funds to help their citizens. And he said, yes, if a tornado hit us, we would have money set aside for police cruisers. But if we wanted to help the people of Erlanger, we would have to go through 2 meetings to vote to change anything. He said the change was essentially a dereliction of duties. So, skipping ahead here. He specifically said he wanted to use it for the case of emergencies. Mrs. Reckers talked about focusing on future planning and the resilience of our city because we had uncertain economic times ahead of us. She thought it was irresponsible to draw down on unreserved funds simply to balance the budget. We're living in unprecedented times, she said. Our residents are hurting. There's more volatility expected of our business community. Looking to secure these funds for future purchases of police cruisers and ambulances and other capital projects that Erlanger needs. So, I mean, several other people piped in and talked about this. This ordinance was passed on the premise that it was going to be used for emergencies. And my point is that it's sitting inside the fund, and if we don't track that, or if we don't have special provisions on how that money gets spent, it will vaporize. And I realize we all know what we're talking about here. We all remember that. I'm not concerned about this council and the people that are sitting in this room. I'm talking about 30 years from now. I hope this fund is still sitting there. And I want people to understand what that money's to be used for, 30 or 50 years from now. If it has a specific name, if it has a line item on the budget, and it has rules on how the money's to be spent, it will forever be used for that. And we'll know that for sure. There's nothing wrong with making this amendment to help clarify that. We're not changing anything. We're just clarifying what the intent of the money was.
Any other discussion? What direction do we have?
Well, what I would propose is that we have a first reading at the next meeting.
Okay. And I guess I want to just clarify or make sure that everybody understands the majority of this ordinance already exists. The only things that are added are the underlined. Mm-hmm. Everything else already existed as the capital fund and what defines that fund. So, okay. Alrighty, thank you. All right, next on the item, the discussion is task force creation and requirements. Councilman Tyson Hermes.
Yes, thank you. So in our current ordinance regarding ad hoc meetings, and it does say in parentheses task forces there. I'm sorry, it's not an ordinance. I mean, it's a municipal order, excuse me. I could go through and read this. I don't know if people want to hear me read it, I'm happy to do it. But if everybody's looked at it, I don't want to waste people's time. But basically it says that it explains how the ad hoc committees are created, how they're maintained, and it does say that the task forces are created by council, but also approved by council. And since the task forces are using city resources, staff time, and the minutes of these meetings are recorded and maintained by the city, for perpetuity, I think it's important that we make sure that the tasks that we're trying to achieve are for the benefit of as the municipal order says, for the staff, residents, or tax-paying businesses of the city. So, there is this process in place. We're just not necessarily really following it. And so, excuse me, there was an application that existed as well, and I'd made some modifications to that just to kind of clarify it and try to make it as crystal clear as possible what the purposes of the task forces are and what the tasks are that we're trying to achieve. So everybody had received this application, but basically what we added on to the bottom of it is making the goal of the task force a SMART goal. And that means that it's specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and it has a given time frame. And what I would propose is that if the rest of council agreed with this, that we would revisit every task force that's existing and fill this application out and kind of reboot each task force. Thank you, Mayor.
Any comments? Ms. Jasper Lucas.
I had a few comments. On section 4C, it says 5 people in attendance at the meetings. I kind of feel like 4 or 5 is a lot. Does that include council, staff, everybody, or does that include all? Is that council? Or I guess what was the intention?
In the original municipal order?
Well, no, on here he put at least 5 people in attendance. I didn't know if that was 5 council members, 5 council and staff, 5 council staff and community members.
Yeah, I don't have the original municipal order in front of me. I can pull it up.
I feel like it was 5
Total.
total.
Yeah, it's total. I think
not
it was.
Including community members.
I agree with that.
Okay. I'm okay with that.
That's the current municipal order.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. It was underlined on here, and that's why I guess I was thinking it was new.
underlined because those were the prior revisions we had made.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it should not have been underlined.
Oh,
in
okay.
what-
Well, then some of this stuff may be irrelevant, but
Yeah, I don't believe that Mr. Hermes is intending to change anything from the existing municipal order.
So the underlined stuff was, some of it I was like, I thought this is what it already was.
Yeah, I think the intent is that we start following what we
Got
did
it.
6 months to a year ago when we changed it.
Okay. Well, my other comments are actually on the application, so let me move to that. Because I thought that was the way it already was, and I just kept thinking, why is this underlined if this is how we're already doing it? The only comment I have on the application was under relevant, it says, does this task force accomplish a city initiative? And my question is there a list of city initiatives? What constitutes a, quote, city initiative? And I feel like that was a little bit vague. I'm not saying I don't agree with it needing to accomplish something that the city wants to accomplish. I'm just not sure that we should call it a city initiative, because there's not like a list of initiatives that we have. But I don't know what to call it. I don't have a suggestion. I just don't like city initiatives.
That makes sense to me, and I wouldn't have any problem changing that. I think I kind of struggled with the same thing, like how do we repeat that, or how do we give more clarification to something being relevant for the city? So I'm open to any kind of suggestions on that.
Unfortunately, I don't have a suggestion, but I just don't know.
I mean, that might be a good opportunity for us to reiterate that section from the municipal order and basically say, relevant, and then kind of reiterate section 4B. Does it benefit the staff, residents, or tax-paying businesses of the city?
Maybe I think that's appropriate.
That might be better.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to go back a couple of years to when we made this change from committees to task forces, because my original intent with making that change was to not just have committees that reported what departments were doing, but to have an actual, almost like a project team that was set out to accomplish a very particular goal. So having that SMART goal in mind, and the original application had SMART goals listed on it as well. But to have it be, there's a sunset. So there's a task that we're trying to accomplish, and then once that task is accomplished, the task force sunsets, just like any kind of project team or, does that make sense? And that was the original intent of task forces. And I feel like we've kind of fallen back into this more committee-based mindset where it's like a perpetual meeting that we'll have forever, when it was not intended to be that way. And I guess the movement to try and get back to the original ordinance or municipal order that was created, and using the application and really being crystal clear of what the task is to try and make sure that we're not utilizing too many of the city resources in order to accomplish these task forces. Because every single time we do a task force, there's public notice that has to go out, there's minutes that have to be reported and added to the website. So it does take up GenGov's time and effort, and the more task forces we have, and however long they continue, it just adds to their workload. So I guess just being cognizant of their time and effort and what the original intent was on task forces. But it's up to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. In thinking about that and working on this, I realized even one of the task forces that I chair does not apply. I mean, this doesn't fit into these parameters. If you remember, toward the beginning of the year, I created a task force called Keeping an Eye on Kenton County. Now, those meetings are really not public meetings. It's just us attending their meeting. So we don't really ever have a public notice. We don't have meeting minutes. It's us just, keeping an eye at the county meetings. So it made me realize the distinction between accomplishing a task for the city and just raising awareness. I'm not accomplishing a task in that task force. We're just raising awareness, and it really isn't an appropriate task force. So I will not be continuing that as a task force. I'm still going to be attending those meetings. I'm still going to try to raise awareness about what's going on in Kenton County. I'm just not going to make it a city task force.
Which then eliminates the need for an agenda, a public notice, and minutes to be kept.
Yes.
You see where we're going with this, right? It's burdensome. Ms. Nicely?
I just have a question about the task force application. It seems like item 1 and 2 are redundant, like a task force name, goal, chairperson, co-chair, then project team, chairperson, co-chair, and team members. Could we maybe take out, take it out above and then have the team members and the co-chair and the chairperson? Okay, because then you're listing the name, department and phone number and email and everything. But thank you.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? I guess I want to understand, what is your all's direction for us? Are we administering this municipal order? Are you monitoring it yourselves? Are you enforcing this yourselves? What do you want us to do from the executive branch? Yeah.
Mayor, the way I would kind of foresee this, if council agrees, is that this task force, or the application would be filled out. I mean, it'd be available to the council members. They would fill out the application and submit it to you. And I mean, I kind of see it as that being, you're the first line. And if you see it as being a fit task force, then it's approved. If you don't see it as being a fit task force, then council would have the opportunity to say, no, we do see it as a fit task force, or not. Yeah, I know you probably don't want to be the first line of defense on that, but you're the one who has the best gauge of the staff time that's involved, the budget that's involved, and the things like that. I think you're the most appropriate person to look at it first.
Yeah, but then do I bring it in front of council for a vote to create it, or?
I'd say if you say yes, then it's a task force. It becomes a task force.
Okay. Is that how the municipal order is read?
It doesn't really-
I'm looking that up right now. I actually don't think that's how it's read, but I'm looking it up right now.
I thought it was you all voted on it, or I could create one. I think you all do have to vote on it to create it.
So you're saying you would say yes, then we would say yes?
The current language says ad hoc committees and task forces may be created either by the mayor or by a majority of city council members at any regular city council meeting and regular caucus meeting for a limited or continuing purpose. Each committee shall consist of at least 2 council members, including a chairperson and vice chairman, with no limitation as to how many ad hoc committees a member of the city council may serve. And then there's other requirements here. So I think the current municipal order, unless there's suggestions to change it, would say that these committees are either created by the mayor or council, but there's not some sort of double blessing required.
And there's not any kind of procedure listed in there of how it happens. We've kind of just made it on the fly.
Well, then I think that's what I would propose, that we modify this municipal order to help give that clarity as well, giving the clarity to the process
Okay.
and the approval.
Okay, so building the procedure into the municipal order of how they actually get established. Or would you just want a procedure from city administration on how to implement this the best? Just
I
a
always think it's
procedure.
easier if it's inside the document, personally, but I saw Jack was shooting lasers through one of those chairs over there as he was thinking.
I think it's a fundamental question. Are these committees of the council or are these committees of the executive branch, right? So, I mean, I think if they're committees of the executive branch, then it would make sense for the mayor to create them and to regulate them. But I don't know if that's what the intent of this was. I really don't. And I know, and we've used Gary Meyer's name a lot here, but I remember him at the time when we were doing this, that he made that distinction, and he wanted people to know, are these committees of council or are these committees of the executive branch? And I'm not sure we've ever really had clarity on that. I think these have all just sort of morphed somewhere between the executive branch and council. I mean, I think council can do whatever they want in these. If council wants to, by majority, modify this and put sort of a restriction on it that the mayor approves these, I think that's fine. I don't know if that's what, I mean, I think you all can do whatever you want on these.
Ms. Jasper Lucas?
I do think that we should have an option, and this is not just for now, but for the future, that even if the mayor doesn't think there should be one, that the majority of council can still sort of override that. I like that that's an option. I'm not saying that it would happen. I just think it should exist as an option in case there were ever a time where, for whatever reason, the mayor said no, and the majority of council said, we still don't think that. We think there needs to be one. And I feel like that was something that when we originally talked about the task forces, that was something that council was like, we still want there to be a second option if council still wants it.
Ms. Kyle?
I just remember when we first started doing it, it sort of was an idea where we all got together at a caucus meeting and we came up with ideas for the task force. And then the mayor would say, okay, does everybody agree? Do we have a task force for that? Who wants to serve on it, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's how it should be. Either you suggest this is a task force, is council interested in taking this? Or if somebody from the council says, we would like to create this task force, and as long as the majority of council sees a need for it and says, okay, but that was something we would discuss, you know, and then we had to discuss when it was over too, because I remember the one I was on was the, it had to do with codes.
The Blight Task
yes.
Force.
And that was one that we felt like we had accomplished, you know, quite a bit, so we just kind of fell apart. Yeah.
And I think we used to, I mean, even though it was really informal, we used to pick the chair and the co-chair right then.
And I think,
And that might be,
I think this municipal order kind of requires that. Again, if we look at the language of the current municipal order, it says ad hoc committees and task forces may be created either by the mayor or by a majority of the city council. So I think by implication, if it's not a mayor-driven task force, it requires a vote of council. And I just think we have gotten away from voting on the pet project task forces, for lack of a better term, like your Kenton County governance one, right? I think we've kind of gotten into, in new business during meetings, people saying, hey, I want to create this task force. Okay. Where I think a literal reading of this municipal order would probably require it to be voted upon by a majority to move forward with that task force. So I actually think right now, I don't have a lot of problems with the current municipal order. I think there's a lot of structure in it. I just don't think we've enforced it. So I think your question, Mr. Hermes, is who should be the enforcement of this? I think we all collectively at these meetings should be enforcing this, right? I should be, the mayor should be, you all on council should be. We should just kind of acknowledge that we've been a little sloppy with this.
Maybe it could make sense to put on the application who this is created by then. I mean, because if I filled out an application and I submitted it to the mayor and she said, yeah, okay, that looks like a legitimate task force, or that could be helpful or beneficial, then we could say, you know, approved by mayor. If the mayor doesn't approve of it, then it has to go to council, and then we could put the council members that approved it
That works. You can add that to the application, that's not a big deal.
And then it still follows the existing municipal order, and there doesn't have to be a change.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Ms. Jasper Lucas, I saw her hand first, sorry.
I was just going to say, could it be part of the process that the application goes out to the mayor and council, like in the council packet before the meeting, so that we all already know what is on the application? So we kind of have an idea, so that if we want to participate, we can say, hey, I'd like to be the co-chair.
Yeah.
And we kind of know ahead of time. Because I know I've suggested, task forces that I literally just came to the meeting and was like, that day, I was like, we need this. And it probably is more appropriate to fill out the application, submit it so that it can be part of our council packet, so that other people have time to say, oh, I have some input on this. And then we can kind of know ahead of time.
Yeah, it's just adding some formality and some, parameters around this before it gets out of control. Ms. Nicely?
I have a couple questions. Jennifer, I really liked what you said as well, too, because I think there's a lot of council members that are very involved with the city, and we want to be on multiple ones. And I did notice some of these questions here as far as the application. One goal that's achievable, I know on the parks, that's kind of ongoing. So is the city beautification. So to fill out this application, we have to say one thing we want to accomplish and then it's over with, because there's so many aspects of a lot of those. And I know we're kind of deciding if we're going to continue like the fire and EMS and a goal, but I think they're very informative too, so people can learn a lot. So when they do come to us, we don't have to meet every month, but I think it gets us more in tune of what their needs are and understanding the departments as well too, and it gets more council members involved if they want to be involved. So I don't know how we can, if there's anything to change on the application, because I'm not sure just one goal actually always fits all the task force. There might be multiple goals and ongoing goals.
I mean, if we want to use the Parks Master Planning Task Force as an example, one of the main things that we do in that task force is prepare for the next fiscal year's budget and what we're going to propose and what parks we're focusing on. So while it is a continuing task force, it does have very specific goals that it's trying to accomplish on a yearly basis. So bringing forth what parks we want to focus on is one of our goals, and we have a timeline of when we have to get that to the mayor and administration for them to put it into the proposed budget. So I think even within the continuing task forces, there are very specific goals that we are trying to accomplish. City beautification, one of our goals was Tree City USA. So what are the other goals? Well, we have a line item on the budget. So it's building the recommendations for that line item. And what are we going to focus on next? So there are specific things that we do. It's not like we just go and talk about, our dreams and desires of city beautification and parks. We do actually have tangible things we're trying to accomplish. So that's just two examples.
I understand we're accomplishing a lot, and I do appreciate that. It's just, I was just trying to understand this application when it's asking for one specific thing. So would we need to keep filling this out every year to continue the specific task force then? Would it need to be filled out every year?
I think that would be appropriate. I mean, I know it's a little bit of a pain, but it does kind of help us make sure there aren't lagging task forces that are just hanging out there for, forever.
Yeah, I guess I kind of agree with that. It refocuses us. Every January, we're reevaluating, okay, what task forces are out there? Are they necessary? Are they accomplishing goals? What are their goals for this fiscal year? It's not ever a bad idea to to have kind of a review of your previous year and a goal setting for the next year.
I also think it would be easy if there's task forces that are producing results. It'd be easy when it comes time to review for the mayor to say, yeah, we're going to continue that task force. We're going to continue city beautification. We're going to continue parks. We're going to continue, those don't necessarily, it'd be up to her discretion, really. I mean, that's what the municipal order says.
Ms. Kyle?
Yeah, and then some of these task force just kind of develop during the year, like Cherry Hill project. And I think that one was very successful. Still, I mean, we don't meet every time, but I mean, we've accomplished a lot, I think, with the help of the city, the police department, and the fire department. I mean, it's been awesome to see that. So there are some things that'll come up during the year that we might not necessarily know about in January that we just kind of, but like Jennifer said, if the person that wants to develop it would say it ahead of time, then that gives the council members a chance to say, I'd like to be on that.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a perfect example of a task force. It had a very specific goal and some achievables that we were trying to get to. And then it's pretty much sunset. Once we saw some improvement that we were actually able to look at and see with the run data. So I think that's a really good example of the proper use of a task force, more as like a project-based team.
This has been very productive, and I certainly appreciate everybody weighing in on this. I think I've been given some pretty good direction as far as this application, and I think that the answer is likely to be that we're just going to put some instructions on this application on what you do with it. And we'll take out the duplication of the chairperson and co-chairperson. We may put something at the top, maybe a check mark if it's created by either the mayor or a majority of council, and then give some instruction on the bottom that this application then gets submitted to the city clerk to be included in the next regular council meeting packet for council to review. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, cool. Any other discussion? All right. Do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Ms. Jasper Lucas, Ms. Nicely, all in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Have a good evening.